is we're going to do some samples from your textbook. So if you flip to page 126 in your textbook, you're going to find a drafting conventions table. And it's going to have plate border, cutting plane, section outline, visible outline, hidden construction line, plaster line, center line, leader line, dimension, section interior, break line, and phantom line. And we are going to draw a sample of all of these. You're going to do some sample lettering, and you're going to do a couple of choice things from this page that I'm going to walk you through. And I'm going to let you know when you only have to do a couple of them versus doing a bunch of them. Whenever I ask you to do something in scale, I'll make sure I let you know that you're doing something in scale. Otherwise, I'll also give you the real measurement for it. And I'm going to make it round numbers as much as I can. You are going to learn these conventions by drawing them. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to start with these right here, which are going to help you learn your line weights. I want you to look over here that it says thick, 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 thin, thin, thin. So I am going to elaborate that on a little bit, but I am going to draw mostly with one sheet of paper and a straight edge as much as I can so that you can see that this isn't that difficult. I'm also only going to use this side of my ruler for some of it. Particularly, I'm going to line up all of those things on this side of my page, and then I'm going to do all of the second page drafting pieces on this side of my page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and measure from the outside of my page so that I know I'm drawing a straight line. And I'm actually going to switch to my mechanical pencil, and I'm going to mark 1 inch in from the edge with the lightest mark I can make with my pencil. I'm going to be as light as I possibly can. I'm also going to be as exact as I possibly can. Then I'm going to put my ruler on those 2 marks that are both 1 inch from the edge of the piece of paper. Curse myself because I just realized my ruler is 1 inch wide. I know that because the other side of my ruler is exactly on the edge of the piece of paper. I'm so smart. And again, I'm going to make the thinnest line I can possibly make. And this is a guideline. So this is a line that's not intended to show up when I'm done. And it's one of those lines that is so light, everybody will just ignore it. I'm going to make another mark at 2.5 inches. And another mark at 2.5 inches. And draw a nice, smooth, straight line all the way down. Once I do this, I am going to start drafting, and from the edge I'm going to come down 1 inch and again make just the smallest little tick mark, and then I'm going to make one every 1/2 inch and every 1/2 inch on this side and every 1/2 inch on this side. And as I go down, I am going to end up connecting those so that I know that my example lines are really perfectly straight and perfectly lined up to one another. Okay, so this top one right here, I'm going to connect, and I'm going to make that the first one, which is called a plate border. So first of all, I just overshot because I wasn't paying enough attention. I really need to concentrate. But I am going to put 2 lines directly next to each other so that it'll create a nice thick line. And this is how to cheat and use your mechanical pencil to be able to make both this super light line here and this heavy line here. Try and make sure that it terminates exactly where you want it to. If it doesn't, and you don't have an eraser shield, like a normal person, as in a normal person doesn't have eraser shields, you can take that folded piece of paper that I showed you how to do, put it right here so that it blocks that edge, and erase right up to that piece of paper. And then you'll have a perfectly ended line. Here is where, again, having that grid paper underneath really does me some good. If I don't have it, I will actually make another guideline, super, super light right here, so that I can label this. And I'll make it just a little bit lower than that line. I'll make a super, super light guideline, just like in kindergarten. I want a line, so I make sure I write on a line. Otherwise, I'm going to end up going off in one direction or another. And this is, again, the plate border. So when we're writing in drafting, we write in all caps. We also try not to make it slant one way or the other. We try to be very neat and very deliberate. I'm going to write a couple more times, so I'll show you that more in a second. Also, you can read about it in your book. So the next part, I'm going to do 2 plate borders right next to each other. So I would measure down and make sure that this next one is really straight. I have the grid behind me, so I know that it's straight. Another thing you can do is drop your ruler, always a good plus. The other thing you can do is come over here and use your triangle to line up very carefully to this line, and then make your straight line this way instead of measuring down both sides. This time, instead of doing 2 lines directly next to each other so they touch and look like a thicker line, I'm going to do 2 thinner lines apart from each other. So these are both plate borders, which is one of the reasons I wrote that a little lower. My next line is going to be a section outline. So out of these items, this is not the thickest line. I take that back. This isn't the thickest line compared to the plate border, but it's the thickest line that's going to be in your drafting. So it is pretty thick. And I'm going to make it just a little bit thicker than a regular pencil line. Sorry if you got my head in that shot. So for comparison's sake, I'm going to go ahead and make the plate border line thicker because it's supposed to be significantly thicker than all the other lines. There we go. So plate border, section outline. Now, if you are drawing this, you're going to want to put a guideline under that. Again, I have the grid under this piece of paper, so I can tell where I'm going without looking. Next, I'm going to do the visible outline. I should also mention that I've strayed above my 1/2 inch mark, so I should make sure I go on that 1/2 inch mark. Make one strong, bold line, all on the same plane. And this is going to be my visible outline. There we go. Next, I have a hidden construction line. So there are a couple things I can do. One of the ways I can make this line is I can do the eraser method, which is I'm just going to draw a line. As opposed to my visible outline, this is going to be a thin line. So it's not going to be a line that I go over a couple times. It's going to be a nice thin line. Next, if I have my eraser shield, again with the dropping of things, I would go ahead and make my dash marks by placing this and erasing only sections of this line. And I would line up the end of my eraser shield so that this gap supplied the exact dimension I needed to make a consistent, smooth looking dashed line. Because one of the things you'll notice about dashed lines, they don't really look good if they're not consistent. So that's one way that I could do it. I'm going to draw another one directly underneath it. You do not need to draw 2. I'm just drawing 2 to show you another way that you could do it. Especially since I have a grid under this, I can use the grid. And so I will start here, draw 2 squares, skip 1, draw 2 squares, skip 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, and a half till I reach that line. And there's another way to do my dash line. A third way, since I've just used 2 of your optional tools to do this, I'm going to go back to your pretty much only required tool to do this project. And I'm going to draw this again with a regular ruler, with a regular, pushing this out of frame, a regular scale ruler, and I'm going to basically draw, skip, draw, skip, draw, skip, draw, whatever measurement I choose. It doesn't really matter as long as I'm consistent, and I'll get a dashed line nice and smooth every time. And that would be a hidden construction line. So next I have the plaster line, which is a dashed line, just like the others we just did, except it's a longer dashed line. So you want to go at almost a full inch, skip a quarter of an inch, almost a full inch, skip a quarter of an inch, that kind of thing. See, nothing to it. This is also a relatively thin line, and it usually, what your book isn't showing you, is that it usually has a PL on it, which looks like this. A P and an L that overlap each other. The center line does have this label on it, but it has a different hash pattern, or hatch, or dash, or whatever you want to call it. So we'd go half an inch, long, short, long, short, long. And that's your center line. And this one usually has the C and the L along the line this way. And this marks the edge of the plaster line in the theater, the back side of the proscenium, and this marks the center. So if you're looking at the bottom of a stage and you have your apron and your audience and your stage, that proscenium arch right here, the back side of it is the plaster line, and directly in the middle of that, from the back of the theater to the audience, that's the center line. I told you I'd need an eraser. All right, so what's our next line? Our next line is going to be a leader line. And this is actually the line that we use to make notes. And this is a line we'll point to anything. And one of the reasons that it's an interesting line is because it's not straight. You don't use a ruler. I should mention you should practice a couple times because it's not as easy as it seems. It's not just, well, it is, but it's kind of hard. I mean, artists of the world just don't get enough credit. So what I'm going to do is I am going to make a note over here, and I'm going to pull out and right over here, actually I'm going to write it right here. I'm going to write leader line, and I am just going to make a leader line as if it was one of these lines right here. So I'm going to make a swoosh, a very fluid S motion, kind of a backwards S, like a 2. There we go. That's it. That's done. That's all of it. I'm also going to put an arrow on both sides. But I'm just going to do a little half arrow. Oop. Half arrow like that. And that's one of the ways to do an arrow in drafting. All right. Leader line. We'd usually do a leader line towards something if we were putting a note on something. The next, we're going to do a dimension line. So I'm going to pick my ruler back up. I'm going to go on the half-inch mark again. And a dimension line is a very light line. It is the lightest line that you're ever going to draw that you intend for people to see. And at the end of each line, where it intersects, I don't know if you can see my guideline, it's kind of gone because I erased right here, but it's the guideline intersects right here and right here. You're actually going to make a tick mark on the end of both these dimension lines. Now you can do a tick mark or an arrow. Your book has an arrow. You can also do a tick mark. So a tick mark would look something like that. And it just goes through the intersection, and your book shows you to make an arrow, which looks like this. So you can do either of them, and you can either leave that arrow open, or you can close that arrow by shading it in. Whatever you do should be consistent on both ends and throughout your entire document of dimension lines. And because I am an old fuddy-duddy who doesn't like to change, I am going to do hatch hatches because that is how I've been hand drafting for a very long time and I don't feel like changing.